Hello and welcome to Embedded. I am Alicia White alongside Christopher White, and we are joined by the Toymakers, Addie and Whisker, to talk about badges and life and phones.
Welcome back to you both.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's quite a long year, but it feels like we're just here.
And it has only been a year because it's about the same time frame where last year we talked about the CypherCon badges, and we wanted you to come back and talk about this year's CypherCon badges.
Woohoo!
Whether or not you want to.
What else have you done in the last year?
Besides badges?
Our
Whisker?
We used to do things, but this past year, the badges that we produced were kind of there was a lot of feature creep involved, and it kind of sucked up 12 months of brain power of at least 5 brains, and I don't even know how many helpers doing assembly and building of various things.
Yeah, I think we've officially burned out a few members of our hackerspace. I think they don't want anything to do with badges anymore. And then the other ones are ready to ask us what next is coming. So,
at what point do you just become Badge Corp?
Yeah. I think we are de facto already there, even though we say we're the Toymakers. But I think essentially we could be called the badge makers, and that would be a fairly accurate representation of what we're up to these days. So,
you've always had a pretty big educational component to the Toymaker activities. Have you considered doing more, teaching other people how to do the badges, and write a book on 10 of the best things you can do for badges?
Yeah. Step 1, don't start. No, just kidding. Actually, yeah, I think I would like to do that. You know, when we decide to stop doing badges, I think writing a book would probably be pretty cool. Because I know we've definitely learned a lot of lessons about not only design thought processes, but also like parts procurement and the supply chain, you know, between China and all the different options that you have in the States, as well as the PCB fab, of course. And I think they're all lessons. Like the minutia is not often shared, I guess. It's just suffered through. So
some of it is just small volume manufacturing problems.
Sure.
But the design, what advice would you give for people who are looking to design badges?
So from our first year, and I apologize if I can't remember if we mentioned this, but from our first year badges, we realized that there's got to be different stages of engagement that the client or that the person has with the badge. So stage 1 would be, or tier 1 would be just the lights and the blinky, right? Like at the very basic level, everybody can appreciate that it looks good. So you have to have at least that. And then the second stage would be, okay, so if they're willing to plug it into their laptops, right? Like, can they easily access it? Can they easily do something with it, even if they're not, quote, hackers, right? So for our Cube badge, for example, that was the game, the text adventure game. And for the phone badge, I would say that would be the ability to dial somebody using the telephone company, or dial your cell phone, or have somebody call you, right? Just use it as a phone. That's something that everybody knows, but is slightly more difficult because it's in the format of a badge. Then tier 3 would be, okay, so you're in the system. Can you actually, use the tools that we've given you in the system to maneuver around. So in the cube badge, that would be, can you operate a time-sharing operating system, right? Can you type help space ? Can you type color red or whatever to change different features on your badge? And then I guess what tier, like what would you consider tier 3, Whisker, for the phone badge?
Oh, probably using it as a modem to connect to digital services on the network that we brought with us.
Sure.
That kind of stuff.
Sure. And then tier 4 or 5. It's for the more hardcore folks. So for the cube badge, that would be, can you go from your badge to another person's badge, get root, and then compromise their badge, maybe write a worm for these badges as they communicate to each other using the Turing complete programming language that, Whisker created to cause havoc, right? And what would the equivalent be then in the phone badge for that?
War dialing carriers on the telephone network and like starting to break into systems and escalate privileges. But, that very quickly turns into tiers 4 and 5 where you're using your phone badge to dial up we put Addie's badge on a modem out on the phone network this year from, her cube badge from last year, so they could dial up Addie's cube badge and beat her text adventure and escalate their privileges and, dig deeper into the network by knowing the year before's badge really well. So it very quickly gets deep, but I think the 3 most important ones are those first 3 tiers. People need to think it's really like striking, like it looks good, and then it needs to be usable for everybody in an easy way if they want to, and then something for the more industrious people who aren't going to be satisfied with just something that blinks.
Right.
I should have remembered that not everybody may have heard your appearance last year or may not have any idea what we're talking about with respect to badges. Maybe we should take a few steps back. These are conference badges. There's CypherCon in Wisconsin, and it's a conference that encourages programming, but often programming with the hacker edge. And these are the conference badges. Just as though I were to go to a technical conference about embedded systems, they would give me a badge that had my name and an NFC chip that identified me to vendors.
You should have them contact us. We can up their game a bit.
Yeah. So these badges that we specifically put way too much sweat, blood, and tears is, like you said, for the CypherCon conference in Wisconsin, and it's a InfoSec/hacker conference, and we've been doing their badges since year 1. So year 1 we had a what is it? XOR. Okay, you're just gonna have to say it, Whisker, because
it was a 7400 logic implementation of a 3-bit XOR stream cipher that you could manually clock using clicky switches from mice. Yeah, it was super nerdy and fun.
Right.
That sounds so simple.
What?
Well, compared to building your own phone network.
Right. So this is the dilemma of trying to one-up yourself and design better, as you go along, or make a design that matches or at least outdoes the design you did before. So you use
linear improvement instead of exponential.
So I think there are a lot of conference badges that I've seen that are, here's a, it's got a microprocessor and a screen and you can do what you want with it.
Right. And you can make your name flash.
You can make your name flash. You can get onto it and program it with some tools. What you both seem to do are to make the electronics equivalent of those really strange magic puzzles the boxes that you can't quite figure out how to open, and there's all these
and
tricks and things, and you can learn all. Yeah,
and one little drawer comes out, but you should actually push that in instead of taking it out.
So there's a huge puzzle aspect to these that I think the normal that don't exist in the normal sort of nerdy badge space.
Sure. And I think part of that is actually having to do with us wanting there to actually be an educational component to these badges. So first year, and maybe I'll have you explain this a little bit better, Whisker, but the first year, obviously using only 7400 logic to mostly people who have dealt with just the digital realm, I think we wanted to teach them basic encryption, right? Using a very simple 3-bit encrypting method. And to show them how it's done, like at the very lowest level, right? And have them practice it and have them be exposed to it. And then the second year, Whisker wanted to expose them to like a timeshare operating system, right? To get into the mindset of, oh, hey, computers back in the day didn't just used to be these things that magically turned on. Like there was paper tape, there was, crazy mechanical things that needed to be put together in order for the computer to function. And then this year, we wanted to expose 500, 700 hackers to the world of phone phreaking, right? The thing that all young hackers from our age group essentially probably tried when the internet was just a little baby, right? And like, when else do you get a chance to phone phreak legally, right? So...
Okay, let me read this description of the badge. The attendee badge for this conference, CypherCon, was a functional telephone/modem/lineman's handset. The Toymakers built a 96-line telephone exchange populated with various toys, BBS, ticker signs, previous year's badges, etc., that were all available services that attendees could dial up from their badge. That's a lot of stuff.
Was this the first time you had to build back-end infrastructure?
Yeah.
How was that? Please don't cry.
It was very enjoyable because I'm just at that age where the BBS world was around when I was very young, but I wasn't really old enough to have really played with it at the time. So I saw my dad logging into BBSs, but I didn't get to do that kind of stuff much because I was just too young, right? And I've doing the 2 previous years at this conference, the people who get us the most amped up to do a really good job are the younger folks that attend, because they read about all this stuff and they have a great amount of nostalgia for a period of time that they can't actually remember, because there's so many cool stories about back in the day, Woz hanging out in the garage making blue boxes and all this kind of stuff. They hear these stories and they really wish they would have been there, but they'll never have a chance to play with any of it. So doing the back-end infrastructure for this, while it was a total pain in the butt to like write a BBS that can run on a microcontroller, it was worth it to see a bunch of 20-something-year-old InfoSec people, hackers, normals, engineers, all these types of folks all attacking it at once and sharing tips and looking up data sheets and taking intricate photos of the telephone system that was encased in acrylic so you could see all of the wires. They spent hours just running their cell phone cameras up and down it, taking videos so they could figure out how everything was wired together to just have a better idea of how to attack the system. It was so glorious.
I remember pictures that you posted with racks and racks of looked like old US Robotics 56K modems. Where did you source all that stuff?
There's an eBay seller who still has some up, by the way, if anyone's into Sportster modems. For $4 a pop. Buy them in volume. It's new old stock, right? Buyer beware. It's 30-year-old modems, and
Don't
the plastic shells, the plastic is very brittle. So when you take them apart to mod them, which we of course had to do to get everything TTL level, all of the screw posts inside of them all broke off, and we basically had to rebuild the shells to get it to look right. But $4 a pop, 10 modems, not bad, right?
That's really...
I mean, they're useless.
Yes.
Of course, they're $4 a pop. But I remember being so excited to get, I think, a 2400 baud modem at one point. It was so fast.
So fast.
So fast. You can almost, read as fast as the text is coming by.
Everyone always asks about those 10 modems, and they don't ask about the 500 modems that went in the badges themselves.
Right.
Which was a much, much harder thing to accomplish, to source, to get here, and to implement into a mobile, battery-powered, not going to catch on fire, beautiful package, right? To me, that was a much harder engineering challenge than going on eBay and scoring 10 Sportsters, right?
How do the phones work? I mean, these aren't just you buy a cell phone and it works. What's inside the phone, like electronics wise?
So it has 2 picks in it. One is principally just driving all of the LED animation, sound. Essentially, it's the output to the user pick, right? And the other one is doing the USB stack and doing all of the bytes in and out. The modem is a module that we found from a Tindie seller based in Korea. And it basically just has an RxTX TTL serial connection that you can talk to. So the second pick there that's doing the USB stack is also hooked up to those serial pins. So it can act as sort of just a serial pass-through when the badge is in the mode of I'm a USB modem attached to your USB port. But of course, we have to shift it into I'm a telephone when it's not plugged in so that you can use the dial pad, the touch-sensitive pad on the face of it, to make calls or interact with the operating system on there. You can reprogram your lights. You can reprogram your ringtones to quite a deep extent. By the way, you can write full musical compositions with like 3 voices of audio. Because, yay.
Of course.
It does seem like feature creep.
The lights are actually a procedural animation system with particles that are bouncing from lights to lights, and you can set up the particles so that they'll affect just the red channel, just the blue channel, or all RGB, and set it to affect whatever light it's on in a triangle waveform or a sawtooth waveform. And with just 2 particles dancing around the badge, you can get pretty interesting and deep procedural lighting effects on it pretty quickly. You can change the scrolling messages, and there's a bunch of different modes to that where it can scroll 1 character at a time or 6 characters at a time across the 7 segment displays, which allowed us to do things like have little almost like ASCII eyes drawn on the display, and because it's jumping 6 characters forward into the string at a time, you can make the eyes look left, look right, look up, look down. Get some pretty fun effects that way. A lot of time and thought went into getting all of those details just dialed all the way in. And the modem was very difficult because what chipset is it that's on there? A Connextant, Addie? One of those, big chip manufacturers that does these, industrial control sort of stuff. The company got purchased after we had ordered the modem modules. The chip manufacturer had been purchased, and they locked out sales of the chips to all of the manufacturers, right? So the person that we had just ordered 500 modem modules from couldn't get the chips.
That's exciting.
Yeah. And there was no substitute module. And so when we said, okay, well, we have 150 of the modules already, we need, another 350, please. She was like, that's great. It's going to cost about 140% more.
Oof.
Yeah. So there went our profits. There went our design fees, and that
delayed everything by several months.
It did,
because they couldn't, even when they could get the chips, they raised the price, but it was a really big delay between the time when they could get the chips again. So by the time they could get the chips, and we forked out, more than twice as much money as we were expecting to get them here, then it was the Lunar New Year.
Right.
And
Perfect.
Korea celebrates that pretty heavily. So all of the shipping and manufacturing and all that was locked down for most of the month. And oh my, that Lunar New Year this year was what?
not stressful at all.
What time of year was it? It was like
March,
and the conference is in
April.
Yeah.
Not, like I said, not stressful at all.
So we couldn't start badge assembly until we had the modems.
Again, also not stressful at all.
And the conference was April.
Yes.
So, I mean, I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't like, oh, you got them in April. You had until June. No, you don't. April.
No. Yes. Yeah. So we had our whole hackerspace came to the conference, which was awesome. We love you guys. But essentially that also meant that I ended up having them work for us throughout the night before the conference, just soldering like crazy and troubleshooting like crazy. Because these badges were hand soldered again, because we had originally wanted them to be done in a fab. But because of that price increase with the modem, we couldn't, we just didn't have the funds to put towards the manufacturer. So we had to hand solder, hand place all 130 components on this badge. And yeah, that was fun. Crazy. Mildly masochistic.
So what anachronistic part are you going to source in massive quantities next time?
Yeah.
What was the first thing people did when they got their badge? I mean, I just want to, did they exchange telephone numbers and immediately call each other, or was that more hidden?
I don't know that they knew what to do with it. I think they thought that it wasn't a phone, like that it just looked like one. And that it was kind of heavy for something that just looks like a phone. But most people didn't know that it was a phone until
they flip up, see the bottom has an RJ11 jack on it, and they're like,
right.
Really? You guys really?
And then when we told them that they actually had a telephone company within the conference that they could call into and route their calls through, then people started just dialing like the operator. So we set up one of our friends as the operator, and everybody's cool with dialing 0, right? It's fairly harmless. You're not going to accidentally call somebody who doesn't want to be called.
What happened when they dialed 911? I just need to know.
Oh no.
Did we set that up? I think I wanted to, but
No, the number range that was active was 601 through 696.
Yeah.
So 911 just wouldn't have connected to anything.
Yeah.
But 0 did.
0 did.
Yeah, 0 would ring all of the operator assigned lines for sure.
And were the operators very gregarious people who wanted to talk to everyone?
Our operator this year was Maddie, who helped us out a great deal. She actually flew in from around Brisbane, Australia, to come help out for the conference. So we had an Australian telephone operator with a very snarky sense of humor. Yeah.
So she would pretend like she was an operator in Australia.
Yeah. Oh, it would be so tempting. You've reached Australia. Yeah. Outside my window, I can see a koala.
That's right. So she did do that to a few people. She pretend, she would adopt the accents of other countries, and she'd say she's from other places, and they'd hang up right away.
Oh, right. Because they
didn't want to, you know what I mean? Yeah, they didn't want to incur any charges, of course. And then it got to the point where she just had a lot of fun. She was just like, okay, this is the operator. What's the password? And they're like, crap, I need a password.
Yeah. It's funny because a lot of people now don't like talking on the phone. And they certainly don't remember having, a landline phone where, you'd spend an hour talking to a friend or something just randomly instead of texting or emailing or social mediating. So were people reluctant to kind of use it and as a phone because they weren't used to it? Or was it just, this is really novel and cool?
The operator phone, I was fairly close to it. It was ringing off the hook for 2 days straight, basically. So I think people were having fun. I think Maddie was a big part of why they were having fun with the voice-to-voice dialing stuff. My focus was more on the dialing up, carrier modem stuff and monitoring the situation as warring bands of hackers were battling over control of the network stuff. But I heard a lot of giggling over there, and that phone was ringing a lot. And she had the one phone that supported caller ID on it. So they would call her and request the operator to find out their number.
Yeah.
And then they would have their number, and then they would tell other people what their number was. And then they would do things like set up a service at that number so you could dial up to their service. It became a greater thing than what we brought.
What kind of services did they set up?
I didn't have too much time to figure it out. One of the services I had attached to it was we had gone down and visited John S. A.Z., who I believe is, everyone should kind of know who he is.
John Shook.
Yeah, John Shook. He's got a big pile of junk in his backyard.
That's because he goes to those.
He likes auctions.
I've always seen on Twitter, and he's got pictures of, I'm going to buy this.
I bought an industrial lab autoclave.
Yep.
So we were walking around the junk pile, right? And I spotted a high school scoreboard sign. And I was like, John, are you going to do anything with that? He's like, no, take it. I'm like, okay, throw it in the trunk. We're bringing it home. So we got this scoreboard, and we gutted it. And we made a new driver board for it that could hook it up to a modem. And we ran a small little command line interface on it so that you could dial into the sign and change the scrolling messages on the sign. And in the middle of the conference, I look over at this scrolling sign built into the rack, and people are advertising their services, what numbers their services are at, on my scrolling sign.
That's a good plan.
What do they do?
I have no idea. I was too busy.
I guess we didn't call.
Yeah, I was so busy answering questions. I didn't have time to play, of course.
Yeah.
Were there other unexpected things people did?
You should tell them the story, Whisker. of
story.
The story.
How it almost caught on fire.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
That's good.
Oh, yeah. We're going to need that one.
So the telephone company itself, we built and I know this is already over the top and whatever. We went to the lumber yard and got black walnut and built a walnut and brass Lexan front and back walnut sides 6 foot tall display piece of a telephone system. So it was just like, it looked like steampunk meets 1989. You know what I mean? It was this weird, beautiful combination. But you could walk up to the telephone company, and right in the middle of the top section, you've got Addie's Cube badge next to my Cube badge. And as some of you listeners might recall, our badges, the Cube badges, talk to each other over IR. So they're sitting right next to each other. They're obviously lined up so that they can talk to each other. But there's a piece of wood in between them attached to a linear actuator. And the linear actuator is attached to one of Joe Grand's JTagulator boards, which is attached to a modem in the rack of modems inside the rack. So they kind of got the idea early on that it's a really big goal to somehow gain control of that linear actuator over the phone lines to get it to drop down and let those two badges talk to each other. Because you can dial up Addie's badge. Mine doesn't seem to exist on the network. And it's obviously connected down to the telephone network, but nobody could seem to figure out how to get to it from the outside. And the only way they could see was that you get to it from Addie's badge. And they eventually traced out which extension my badge's modem was hooked up to. And it was the extension that can reprogram and control the PBX itself. Then they were really excited. They're like, okay, we need to get this trapdoor out of the way so we can get into Whisker's badge and shenanigans.
I like the visualness of this, that you made it clear what the goal was, just visually. You didn't have to explain it.
Yes, and even so, I ended up stuck next to it answering questions for 2 days straight.
Did anybody move the block of wood?
Yes, eventually. There was some interesting stuff that they had to do to get there. So, and this is all kind of technical, and some of it's a little old-timey and weird, and without context for the cubes, it's a little bit weird to understand, but they found Addie's badge, its extension phone number. They would dial up into there. They beat her text adventure. They get into the time-sharing operating system, which is the next tier up after the text adventure. And then they can telnet over IR into my badge. But it isn't there because there's a piece of wood in the way. So they need to go back out onto the telephone network and dial around. They dial around and they eventually find the telephone number for Joe Grand's JTagulator. And as far as it looks from the outside, it's a completely stock JTagulator. The purpose of the JTagulator is to automatically scan for UARTs, JTAG ports, stuff like that when you're working on equipment. We got together 2 nights before the conference, Joe and we redid his firmware for the JTagulator to look like the real JTagulator firmware, but to not actually be the real JTagulator firmware.
That's
and
just
did
mean.
a bunch of tricky hardware little hacks to it as well to get it to do what we wanted it to do. JTagulators aren't out of the box designed to answer telephones, for example, and they're not out of the box designed to be able to control H-bridge motor controller stuff. So we had to modify it a bit. And we were doing that, wrapped it up the night before we left, threw it in the back of Bruiser's truck, drove to Milwaukee, unloaded it, and we're like, okay, hopefully that all works, because we had 3 hours to do it, and it's really complicated, and we had to do the limit switches backwards on the linear actuator, so if there's a problem, this is going to go badly. Yes. Okay. So
I'm beginning to see where the fire comes in.
they dial up the JTagulator, and they're playing around with all the different features, because the JTagulator does a bunch of stuff that's not really related to the puzzle, and they don't know what aspect of it we're taking advantage of for the puzzle. So they're just playing with everything, and none of these guys have ever used one really in person before. So they're just kind of having fun with it, and they discover that if you set the target voltage in the firmware of the JTagulator to 0 volts, that the what chips are those? He uses some sort of intermediary between the I/O pins and the outputs, just some sort of buffering chips where you can control the voltage on them. Mm-hmm. If you set it to 0, we happen to be using those lines for our modem lines. So you get locked out of the JTagulator because you just set your plus and minus, your ones and zeros to zeros and zeros, and you lose connectivity to the thing you were talking to, right? So they lock themselves once out on accident, and they don't know why, and I don't know why. And I I reset it, right? I'm nice, I'll reset it. And then they did the same thing again, and then they knew what it was. And they're like, okay, now we know that we can't do that anymore. And I thought about it for a minute, and I was like, you might have just discovered a useful tool for your overall goal here, if you think about it. And I didn't tell them what I was thinking, but they're really smart kids, and they thought about it for a minute, and they're like, oh yeah, if we use the JTagulator to drop the linear actuator and then set that voltage level to 0, it's going to disconnect us, but it's going to keep everyone else from going in there and putting the gate back up while we're trying to go from the cube badge to the cube badge. And they're like, we're geniuses. This is the best plan ever. It's great. And I agreed at the time.
At the time.
Yeah. So
I had music here.
The sneaky thing we did with the JTagulator is it runs on a parallax propeller, which is an 8-core processor, and it only uses a couple of the cores to do its job. So there's a bunch of cores just sitting there doing nothing. So we built a command line interface into one of those cores. And the JTagulator, when you're using it, one of the things you often would do with it is to scan for UARTs. So we had the JTagulator octopus to itself, so that you could JTagulate the JTagulator to find the hidden serial connection and get into the second CLI that was buried deep in there, which was the control for the linear actuator. And it took these kids 2 days to find it, which I'm proud about. But when they did, they were super, super, super excited. And they're like, they understood the universe, and it all clicked. And they're like, Whisker, you're evil. Sitting next to Joe at the conference, and we're both giggling like kids. They eventually got in there, and they got into the controller for the motor controller, and they dropped the gate, and the gate starts coming down. There's 30 people standing around this beautiful rack sitting in the middle of the room. They're all watching as this thing just slowly goes down, and they're like, yeah, cheering, except for the guys over there who are like, man, we were trying to do that. And it's going down. And then the person who's in there sets the voltages to 0 to lock everyone else out of it, so no one can put it back up on them. And last minute, we had blown up an H bridge, so we had to use a different H bridge that didn't have the limit switches on it, so we had to do the limit switches in software, and the I/O pins that are reading the limit switches in software are on those chips that they just changed the voltage on. So now ones are zeros, and the limit switches are like, everything is fine. This is fine. And the linear actuator's moving down. And to make sure everything looked great, it was glued to the end. The wooden piece was glued to the end of the linear actuator. And this is like an industrial big linear actuator. It's 3 feet long. It's overkill. and it's going down, and then it starts ripping off limit switches, and it gets to the end of its travel, and the H bridge asks the limit switches what's up, and they're like, this is fine, we're fine. And the H bridge starts warming up, and then Ethan, who is helping me on site, and I start calmly taking all of the cap screws off of the acrylic, and we start placing this giant sheet of acrylic off to the side, and everyone's cheering because things went down, and Ethan and I are looking at each other going, we've got about 2 seconds before this catches on fire. Let's unplug this. And this. We're smiling. Put the cover back on the rack, and everything's like, why'd you guys take that off? It's like, we're not telling you. There's secrets to this. This is a puzzle, guys.
Yeah,
Don't cheat.
It was super important stuff that we planned.
And was this was around the same time that guy was trying to get?
Yeah. To get into Addie's badge,
Right.
You have to go in through the USB port through the original design. We didn't have enough room on the propeller during doing the Cube badge to fit all the strings in for the text adventure. So we offloaded some of them to the PIC, which was doing the USB port in. So I couldn't just hook a modem to the propeller on that thing. I actually had to go in through the USB port. So to accomplish getting a modem attached to that USB port, we put a Raspberry Pi Zero in the back of the rack. So that was hooked to a modem. You dial up the Raspberry Pi Zero, which I had already logged into and started a PicoCom terminal session into her Cube badge, so that it would just be transparent. The Raspberry Pi Zero wasn't part of the game. So every time I booted up the rack, I would just log that in so that when they dialed that number, they would just instantly be on Addie's badge without ever seeing that the Pi was even there. But there is a bug in the Cube badge. If you run some TBAS code in the TBAS interpreter on it in just such a way, or maybe it's something with the emulator for the year 1 badge, I forget. But there's a bug where you can actually get the Cube badge to shut itself off, like crash it hard enough that it turns off. And this other guy who was battling the hackers who did all that other stuff was in Addie's badge while everyone else was playing with the linear actuator, and he got Addie's badge to crash and shut off, which ended the PicoCom terminal session, like pipe broken, sort of. It no longer has connectivity down the USB port because Addie's badge just shut off. But I had run PicoCom sudo, and it was still an active sudo when her badge shut off. So he's dropped to a Raspberry Pi terminal with sudo powers, and the first thing he does is change the root password on me.
You deserved that.
This is the fun of like, okay, you're going to design this overly complicated thing and then put it in front of 500 hackers and say, here, play with this. Shenanigans are going to occur. Addie spent the entire conference sitting in a chair fixing badges.
Soldering. Yeah.
That's the problem with getting them done so late. Having so many manufacturing issues is that it's going to have to require some repairs.
Yep. So, I mean, essentially every badge had a bridge on their 2 picks. So we were fixing bridges on every badge. It was terrible. It was terrible, but yeah. But we actually managed to still keep up the pace with like the number of people that were coming in. So I don't think any of the conference goers ever noticed that we were like soldering for our lives. Yeah.
You have to keep the magic up.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a bad night, but it was an amazing night the night before the conference. We just didn't have enough time to assemble these things right because of the modem, not being there in time and all that. So we were still doing debugging of all of the assembled badges the night before the conference. And this isn't that odd of a thing for conference badges because it's such a short timeline. It's really, really difficult to nail the deadlines in a efficient and, sometimes you just have to pull all-nighters to make it happen. And a lot of people from our local makerspace here that we run came with us out to Milwaukee this year. And a lot of the folks from the conference and from Milwaukee and a few other places got together the night before to test and flash firmware on the badges that weren't quite ready yet. And we were doing it in our hotel room. And
it was like 15, 20 people.
Yeah.
In like this small hotel room.
It was getting hot.
It was
hard
really
to breathe.
hot.
And Trenton came up and he does the capture the con thing for that conference. And he was like, this isn't, I'm going to go talk to management. He goes down and he talks to hotel management. It's like at night. It's 11 o'clock at night or something. And it must have been even later than that.
No, it was
actually,
like
when it started.
12.
It was really late. So he goes down there and he convinces the management to let us take over the hotel bar. And the hotel bar in this particular hotel is essentially a ballroom with like 80-foot ceilings, crystal chandeliers, massive marble tables. And before you know it, we've got 25 soldering stations, flashing stations, testing stations. It was a beautiful sight to see electronics manufacturing happening under crystal chandeliers for the first 5 hours. Then it got bad. They had jazz music playing.
Was the bar still open?
No, but they kept bringing us food and sodas and stuff. It was really, yeah, they took good care of us that night. We were very thankful for it too.
And totally delirious by the end of it.
Did you get to have any fun at CypherCon? Did you get to see any talks?
I don't know that we've seen a talk.
No, I've never been to a talk.
I've never actually been to the con.
Yeah, no. I don't know. I was actually, I asked Peter, who is our engineer, who did a lot of the hardware on this, and I said in a like post-con debrief, right? I was like, did you enjoy sitting there and soldering and debugging? Because that's one of the concerns is, ideally, of course, we would have liked to have all the badges done perfectly before the conference so that we could just walk around, see what people are doing, tease people when they're not getting things right, whatever. But I think he and I both, we actually enjoyed soldering, and I think we enjoyed troubleshooting and getting the badges working because they were like mini reach goals, right? Because we went into the conference with 165 finished. Out
of 500?
Okay. Out of 500.
That's ambitious.
Right. and we were like, we are so screwed on so many levels right now, but we are going to manage to get all the badges that these people need. And we did, which was just like, my mind is just slightly blown from that. But despite that, I think it was adrenaline, right?
Yeah.
And we got them done, and there was like nobody noticed really, or nobody complained to us at least about the pace that the badges were coming out. And people liked them. So in some ways, in a masochistic way, like I think we still did enjoy the conference, right? Even if we didn't get to see the talks. Although, as of today, Joe Grand's talk is up, and he has done a lot more sketchy things than I thought he's ever done.
Joe Grand did kind of share his dirty laundry.
I know. And I was like, whoa, Joe. Like,
I think this is okay to say. He came here to hang out with us right before the conference, and we all rode together over to Milwaukee. So we had a few hours in the car with Joe, and it was a few hours of him on the phone with different lawyers from different organizations that people would recognize to make sure that he was not going to get in any trouble for telling the stories. It was hilarious to listen to. The lawyers are like, wait, you did, what?
Let me look up the statute of limitations on that.
Right. That's exactly right. So actually Whisker and I just was yesterday, actually, because it was released yesterday.
I finally got to see it. Yay.
Yeah, we finally got to watch it. We're like, and probably for the best, because I probably would have scolded Joe and been like, dude, you were a little punk. But now he's so he's like an upstanding member of society, so.
Yeah, he definitely is someone who thinks that hacking and reverse engineering is important, not for the benefit you get, but for the benefit you can give.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So back to the badges. The phone system doesn't exist anymore. Can people still do things with the badges?
The badges did a lot of stuff that didn't require the phone system. We felt that was important, that it would still be useful after the fact. You can still program music into it. You can still program the scrolling stuff into it. It has a full version 2 programming environment of the TBAS programming language, which now there are multiple GitHub projects out there of folks who have written their own debuggers and interpreters for. So it's actually kind of a usable, serious language now, because there's real tools out there for it, which was weird.
How do you feel about that? And why didn't you name it after yourself?
It's named TBAS. One of our developers that helped me work on it, getting it dialed in for the Cube, and a lot more this time around. When I was first working on it for the Cube, I was trying to figure out what to call it, and it's based on a Turing tar pit type of language, which are very painful to use. And he jokingly said, "'Tis but a scratch," Monty Python reference, the Black Knight.
Okay, yeah.
So TBAS it became, right? And anyone who's used it for any amount of time pretty much feels like the Black Knight. So it works. The guy who changed the root password on the Raspberry Pi was wearing a "'Tis but a scratch" sweatshirt. So I should have paid closer attention to that guy. Should have spotted that.
I think we still don't know the password at this point, too. So
that card got wiped as soon as it got home. So there's a lot of fun that can still be had with just the badge. But to say that the telephone company does not exist anymore is not true. The telephone company still exists because we always over-order parts. So we ordered 50 extra modem modules and are presently in the process of building a 50 modem pool, internet accessible bank of modems, so that you can come in over Telnet, pick up a modem on the system, and dial around inside the telephone network and play with all the toys.
Do you think you'll be taking that system next year for people who return and bring their 2018 badges?
Well, it's 6 feet tall, and no.
It's got wheels, doesn't it?
No.
You should miniaturize. You got the little modules now?
I think we gave the bellhop a $40 tip.
Yeah. No, I think next year, it's funny because Michael Getzman, head of CypherCon, came last night to thank everyone in the hackerspace for their work on CypherCon. And we started talking, of course, of next year's badge, which we have like 3 ideas for. And I think we may go in a slightly different direction. One where we're not soldering the day of. Yeah. And I jokingly told him, I said, pink flamingos, that's the badge you guys are getting next year. Like, that's it. Just a board. It's got a pink flamingo. Y'all figure out what it's going to do.
I think you should put some connectors on it, USB connector, Ethernet connector, but not have them attached to anything.
Great. You've built up this legend that these badges are these deep, complicated things with discovery. And so for your final badge, when you finally decide to give it up, you should have something that looks like it does a lot, but does absolutely nothing.
Right. Yeah, all the connectors and a microcontroller, but nothing connected.
And then you can spend the whole con watching people try to do something.
Watching the students just bash their heads.
I think I figured the root password out.
What's the secret? Well, and it's funny because last year we had a lunch of all the village heads, and Michael Gutzman, and we brought the prototype CypherCon Cube badge, where all it was the sides, because we just wanted to make sure that the tessellization of the sides actually worked without any parts. And so we brought that and we're like, this is the secret badge. And so we had like all these village heads looking at it, and they were like seriously examining it. They're shaking it. They're like trying to figure out whether it was like RFID. Is there something in it? Is there? And I pretty much lost it. And one of the guys was like, "Oh, hey, like, can I take a hammer to it?" I'm like, "You do whatever you want to do. Like, you want to take a hammer to it? I can fix it." And he's like, "Dang it, I don't have a hammer." And the waiter brought a hammer. We were like, "Dude, best waiter ever." Yeah. So we've.
I wonder how long it would take the first really, really smart person to figure out they've been had.
I'm thinking about a rock with a wire, just a single wire.
Too obvious. Well, they embedded all the electronics in this rock.
Well, we've been tempted to make like badge kits where you have to like mine your own metals.
Here's your fiberglass, your resin, your copper powder. Go.
You didn't have to do all the soldering. You could have made that part of the badge.
That's true.
First step.
It's an educational. It's an educational moment for people to learn how to solder SMT components. There you go.
And debugging hardware. It's an important skill.
That's
right. Mini escape room.
You see all these bridges? This is part of the fun.
Next year, it's just a pile of components.
Well, that's what he said. Just a pile of raw ore.
Yeah. Here's where you can smelt it.
It'll be the Minecraft of badges.
Dude, we could totally do that. And it would actually kind of fit into the narrative, right? You go from a cube badge, right? And like in Minecraft, it's all cubes and such. Yeah.
This is good. I'm digging this.
Yeah, me too. I think you guys have a future in badge making.
Maybe run out of town on a rail.
Yes.
You said villages, and I only recently came to understand that this is sort of like tracks in other conferences or communities of similar interests. Birds of a feather, whatever.
Right.
Can you tell us more about how conferences like this are structured? It's not all just talks and networking.
Right. So at least for CypherCon, there's 2 main tracks of talks, from my understanding, since we haven't actually gone to that. Exactly, right? And then all throughout the conference, regardless of who's talking in these tracks, you have these villages. So you might have like an Internet of Things village. You might have Whisker's favorite. It's like is it the Vintage Village?
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, Vintage Village, where he had like, I don't know, 10 or 15 old computers that were all functional, had games on them, etc. There was the hardware hacking village. They had their own little mini badge that people could solder and learn how to solder on. What other villages are there, Whisker?
There are a lot. I didn't get a chance to go check any of them out because I was kind of standing next to the thing that might catch on fire at any moment.
You didn't know that initially.
Oh, I definitely knew that initially.
They caught fire once. Yeah.
Not there. Here in the office. Yeah.
In the pre-testing.
Yes.
Right.
So I wasn't walking away from that thing. There's a bunch of them. I did get to meet all of them because when we set up the telephone network, we built these little station boxes. Each one of them has 4 phone jacks on it, and we gave each of the villages their own set of stations and wired up the whole pavilion, the whole giant room with every table in there had multiple telephone lines.
Right.
And we asked their permission and got to know them a little bit. It was nice.
Yep. But yeah, so these villages are essentially just more topical, people with more topical interests, more specific interests. So if you wanted to learn more about hardware hacking, then you would just sit down at with the hardware hacking village and learn how to solder, ask them questions, things like that. So
this is pretty tough. I mean, you have to plan a conference, tell people about it, get your speakers, and that's the normal part of the conference. And then you have the villages, which require space and time and advertising as well. It seems like a more difficult way to run a conference. I don't know why I'm asking you this, but
no. I mean, I think part of it is because of how like DEF CON has been run, I guess. Because per my understanding, DEF CON probably started the idea of villages. So they have like the crypto village, they have hardware hacking, they have all these different villages. I think there's even one this year of like a marijuana villagers. There's some pretty like out there like biohacking village and things like that. And so I think all of the people who head up these conferences, especially these InfoSec hacker conferences, take a little bit of DEF CON with them, and that's how they kind of mirror their own conference setup.
That makes sense. If I did a conference setup, I probably would have some aspect of unconference to it because that's conferences I like to go to. Have you ever been to DEF CON?
No, we have not. We are going for the first time this year, though. So that should be exciting. We hear that Vegas is the best of humanity and the worst of humanity. So that should be interesting.
I haven't heard the first part.
Maybe I should say the best of America. Is that how it was said? Best of America and worst of America. So best of America.
That's
in the
part
sense,
of what was said. That's not all of what was said, and we can't repeat the rest of it.
We can't. Yeah, right. Like best of America in terms of like architecture, opulence. it's the fanciest stuff that America has
it's
to
most
offer.
Spaceport.
Right. But then, you're looking apparently under the Luxor pyramid, you may see like a homeless guy puking on your shoes, right? So best of America, worst of America. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect. A lot of people are telling me that I will pretty much want to run away after 3 days. But I'm going in with an open mind.
Expect smoke.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah.
So I guess they still allow folks to smoke in the casinos.
Yeah, and they do. Yeah. But why are you saying that? You've never been? I've never been.
I've been to Vegas.
No, to DEF CON.
Well, I mean, DEF CON's in Vegas. We were talking about Vegas.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe the air quality will improve, like if there are fewer DEF CON goers in the casinos. I don't know.
That's logical. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we're actually improving Vegas by bringing a bunch of hackers. Right. I mean, your internet systems may be completely borked, but that's okay.
The internet's not all it was cracked up to be anyway.
That's right. That's right. At least you can breathe easier, right?
It is going to be really interesting seeing the culture differences between a bunch of Midwestern, Wisconsin, cheesehead hackers versus the gritty DEF CON experience, from what I hear.
Yeah. I feel like this is this should be made into a musical like West Side Story.
I'll work on my snapping.
Okay, back to the idea of a book or tutorial about building badges.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people who are considering it? I mean, is the advice just run away, or is it more along the lines of set your manufacturing up early?
Well, I mean, is there a lot of opportunity for people to get into this? I guess there's small conferences and things that we could start out.
Right. So there are a lot of smaller conferences that don't have badges that, certainly folks could get started at. And the thing about it is if you end up getting to know the founder or whatever of the conference, and they realize that they can trust you with their finances, then you pretty much have a relationship for life, right? Where people don't necessarily like to change designers in the middle of the course of their conference, right? From year to year.
You do a good job and people are going to want to keep you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty basic.
But
right?
Let's be clear here. While it's fun to do an unofficial badge, like you're doing 50 for your friends or doing a little Kickstarter to do it, it isn't fun to do a badge for a conference because the budget is going to be minuscule per badge. The conferences have to build it into the ticket price. And, while the ticket price seems big, that also has to cover the catering, the venue, blah, blah, blah. So there's not much left at the end of the day for badges. Therefore, it's not profitable and it's not fun and there's a deadline. And if you don't deliver, they don't have security badges for the conference to show that people have bought their tickets. So you really can't fail. You have to do it.
I mean, I should say, I'm a goal-oriented person, so I find that kind of thing fun, right? Whereas it can be a lot of pressure, right? So obviously take it with a grain of salt. If you are a workaholic like I am, you may enjoy it. And the other thing is, for folks just getting started, certainly like the unofficial DEF CON badges or even doing unofficial badges for other conferences is a great way to kind of dip your toes into making badges, so you can kind of figure out the kinks, right? Like what works with your personality, what works with your design aesthetic, how much is your design aesthetic going to cost, how much time is it going to actually need. So if you wanted a conference badge in time for CypherCon, but you realize, oh man, this is just not possible, maybe you need to think about having that badge be debuted at ThoughtCon instead, or at DEF CON instead. And this year, actually, DEF CON, the unofficial badge community, their hashtag badge life, they have this, it's called a shitty add-on, what's the word, Whisker? It's standard? Yeah, I guess we could call it that, a shitty add-on standard, where really you could just make a little mini badge with 2 LEDs on it with 4 holes, and there's your quote badge.
A lot of the larger, experienced, unofficial badge producers are adding this functionality to their badges where there's a 2x2 pin header on there, and it's power, ground, and I2C lines, right? So people are making little badges that just plug onto that. So the bigger run badges are going to be the carriers for all of these little inexpensive for people who just want to sort of dip their toe in, but not end up in a situation where you're on the phone with China every day like we are, or packages are showing up at your front door that were supposed to go across town in Shenzhen, but for some reason somebody sent it to Minnesota. If you just want to keep it fun, that is a really good thing to look into.
Because then you can work on PCB art, you can experiment with the different layers of your PCB, and kind of get into that. And it's cheaper too for the people who are buying them, because I think most of the prices that we've seen for this year's DEF CON, at least, the little mini badges are like $20, right? Which are much, much, much more palatable than like the $250.
And to reiterate, those little tiny badges that they're selling for $20 is more budget than you would get for doing an official badge for a conference. Just to hammer that point home.
Right.
Less fun.
And yet, $20 probably would cover my costs if we did like an embedded FM badge.
Way more.
That would light up and have our logo on it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think if you had like, 2 LEDs, okay, and you did that little on badge standard, your cost would probably be maybe $1 per badge.
Well,
so $20 you're making profit. Yeah. So they are small, right? But that's kind of
quantity makes it expensive.
Right.
And well, I'm mentally adding an accelerometer and a small processor, so I've gone way over the 2 LED thing.
You already know how to do this.
Feature creep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The heck with 2 LEDs. Let's throw some NeoPixels on there.
Yep. So, and so therein is the rabbit hole, right? Well, it'd be okay with just LEDs, but
we could do better.
Right.
It could be more interesting.
Right.
Yeah, I can see how the badges would get way out of control. And I do see them more often, even at smaller conferences. And the idea that you give them away to your friends and they wear them in addition to the official badge. This idea that there's going to be a sort of like an Arduino Shield system, although much smaller, connector is a great idea, because it does free you from having to think about power, which is always a pain.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Neat. All right. Now I have more ideas, and yet I'm not going to do any of them. I am going to do the other things that I have ideas about.
I think an embedded FM little mini badge would be super cool.
What have you done?
Except I'm not going to DEF CON.
No, we just need to steer it into a modular synthesizer embedded.
Yeah. Exactly.
No.
Thanks. That's how you get Chris on board.
Oh man, now I have ideas.
Yeah, you could hold hands, and then you connect modules, and then you could make a synthesizer out of people.
And would you touch the people, or would it be whoever was holding hands?
Well, you'd have to have connectors on. You'd have to have
No, you just put little metal pieces on everybody's hand.
Yeah.
And then if you and I are touching, we're playing C, but if I'm touching Addie, we're playing D.
You'd be a filter, and somebody else would be an oscillator.
Oh, I see. Excuse us, listeners. We have to go off and design some things. Addie, Whisker, are there any thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
You first, Whisker. I got to think of something profound.
I think this badge stuff is really fun if you keep it, contained to a really small run and it's not terribly complicated. I can't say I recommend it above that level. It's a lot. It's like a job. It's not like a job. It is a job, right? So if you're looking for fun and you like building circuits that aren't necessarily useful, then these things can be a lot of fun. Just don't let it turn into something that is work, because I think that's a little bit not the point. When Joe Grand did the first one of these for DEF CON many, many years ago, it was to spark creativity in people to say, okay, This isn't just a little piece of paper that says you paid. This is something you can interact with and that can teach you something. And it's art, which is cool, right? And if we keep it that and try to keep it not being work, I think we'll end up in a better place at the end of the day, for keeping that spirit alive of what his original idea was. I think that's the important thing.
Yep.
I'm not allowed to, but everyone else take that advice.
And then I have 2 messages, I think. One is to next year's CypherCon, folks. We're making a pink flamingo for the badge. Just accept it.
Get your shrimp ready.
That's right. And then the second message actually is to my dad, who he got really excited when he heard about this badge, and he wanted to change out his phone, like his landline phone, and hook this badge up. No, Dad, it doesn't have caller ID. And Dad, it's a toy. You know, don't treat it like an actual phone. It's just use your phone. And those are my messages.
We finally got to meet Drew in person.
PDP 7.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he's great.
At CypherCon this year. So I'm going to reveal this pro tip for all of you makers out there who need to be, making PCBs and don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money. I've spent years tweeting at him complaining that they only have purple boards. Not in a very serious way, because I understand why they do that. But for years now, I've been working on them. And of course, you can get whatever colors you want if you order a full panel. But when you're just doing a little prototype, they're always purple. So I complain at him, right? If you complain to him in person about the purple colors, he will give you coupons for free boards just to get you to shut up. So everyone, when you meet Drew in person, join the battle to try to get multicolors at
Do you know
OSH
how many people listen to this show?
Poor Drew. Go up to Drew and say thank you.
He loves
Drew has
meeting
been
people
great
too.
for the show. He's always wonderful about retweeting.
He's a sweetheart, and I'm just going to keep on it. Maybe if you guys tell him that this was like part of the ending of the show, he'll send you guys some coupons to cut it out.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not sure that, yeah.
Last time I saw him, he just gave me a board.
It's not extortion, right?
I think maybe he's prepaid. Our guests have been Addie and Whisker, the Toymakers. You can find them on various sites by taking all of the vowels out of Toymakers. Tymkrs. That includes Twitter, Tindie, YouTube, and their own Toymakers.com. Thank you for being with us, Addie and Whisker.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you to Christopher for producing and co-hosting. And thank you for listening. You can always contact us at show@embedded.fm or hit the contact link on embedded.fm. Now I have a quote to leave you with, a definition that maybe we should have had earlier. But it was a phrase coined in 1982 by Alan Perlis in the Epigrams on Programming, number 54. Beware of the Turing tar pit, in which everything is possible, but nothing of interest is easy. Embedded is an independently produced radio show that focuses on the many aspects of engineering. It is a production of Logical Elegance, an embedded software consulting company in California. If there are advertisements in the show, we did not put them there and do not receive money from them. At this time, our sponsors are Logical Elegance and listeners like you.